Well, hello and good evening, everyone across the Lone Star State. It is 6 p.m. in most of the state, 5 p.m. where I am. The sun seems to be staying out later and later, so I hope everyone's enjoying the sunshine. My name is Marco. I'm a digital organizer with Texas AFT. Patty?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Patty Quincy, Director of Public Affairs and Legislative Counsel for Texas AFT.
Yeah, so while we give folks a chance to tune into the live stream, we want to thank everyone for joining in. We know you have many ways to spend your evenings, and we're very grateful you're spending them with us. But as we get going here, Patty, what a week today or this week, in the Texas legislative session. A bit of a mix of lots of news, but also not a lot of movement on stuff. The big thing right now that we know of is SB2. Of course, this is the sort of Senate side voucher bill that we know has pretty much nothing good in it with regards to Texas public education. Why don't we go over that a little bit?
Yeah, and I've got some slides to show y'all about this mess of a bill.
So we'll get into it later then, which is totally fair.
Oh, well,
yeah.
We could do both. Yeah, this is just what's a nice word I can put that's family friendly about this bill. This was just a waste of taxpayer time and money. This is a welfare for the wealthy bill. In fact, the way it's written right now, Elon Musk could send all 12 of his kids to private schools in Texas on your taxpayer dollar. So it's just incredible that they're doing this at a time when our public schools are closing schools, that our classes are ballooning in class size. We have an unprecedented number of uncertified teachers in our classrooms. Our public schools desperately need funding so badly, but this SB2 proposition would amount to a $4 billion a year price tag for taxpayers by the year 2030. So just by the end of the next biennium, it could be catastrophic. But here's the kicker. It's not just going to dismantle our public schools, but the actuarial statement in the SB2, which is part of the fiscal note for every bill that gets a hearing, the actuarial statement actually says that if the payroll growth is destabilized in public schools and there's a decline by just 1%, then that could create an actuarial unsound situation for the teacher retirement pension. Now, what that means is whenever the system is not actuarially sound, meaning it can't pay off all its obligations within 30 years, that means that annuitants cannot get any increases in their annuities, and it could possibly create a need to decrease benefits, increase contributions by the state and teachers. So it's just a mess all over. The only people that would benefit from this bill would be the very wealthy.
Just a ticking time bomb, waiting to be detonated here. So pretty bad bill. Thanks for that preview, Patty. I appreciate it. And I know we'll probably also spend some time talking about the State House as well. What do we know on that front? So we know there's the Senate side bill. What are we looking at in the House?
Well, we still don't know, but it's very interesting. The people that came to testify on the Senate bill side are going to be the same folks that testify on the House side. And it was interesting to hear some of their concerns. They were very legitimate. There was a lot of homeschool parents who were concerned about government interference in what they do, because Senate Bill 2 requires pre-approval of every single vendor. It's also a vendor bill in and of itself. The people who would manage these monies and the middlemen that are all private companies would stand to make hundreds of millions of dollars off of this. It's just really a gross kind of a money grab on all levels.
Yeah. Well, that's a great preview. Well, it's not a very rosy outlook, but your preview, in your words, was great. Thank you, Patty. I know we definitely, and everyone watching, is interested in knowing what's going on. If you want, we're going to get into a lot of the stuff, with a slide deck later in this session. But if you want to know more, yourself and read what Texas AFT's got to say about all this stuff, you can head on over to our newsroom, texasaft.org/newsroom. There you can also find a link to subscribe to our hotline newsletter, and all those links will be forthcoming. So if you missed that, you'll have it for later as well. I wonder if we're ready to move on now.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, so while the slide deck gets set up, just know that it's going to be, an overview of what's going on in the Capitol. We discussed it a little bit just now. but we'll go over, Governor Abbott's State of the State address, which also there it is. Yeah, go ahead, take it away, Patty.
Thanks, Marco. So this was a month of a week, as Nicole Hill, our comms director, puts it. It was just a very eventful week, and it's still going on. But the thing that started off our eventful week was the State of the State, and that happened on Sunday. And this is just kind of a preview of what our Educators Bill of Rights is all about. And you can get a better look at it at the link that we'll drop here in the chat in a moment. But this is basically what our agenda is. And it was an agenda that was designed by our members to basically just some simple ground rules, some basic rights that people deserve, like a safe workplace, like a retirement that's secure, like a safe and healthy workplace where people don't have to worry about the air conditioning and the HVAC systems, and other items such as a defined workday. A lot of people don't realize teachers don't have a defined workday. So those are some of the things that we're fighting for, and we hope you take a look at that. Now, this week, as I mentioned, the State of the State happened, and that was on Sunday. And notably, one thing that the governor said was going to be a priority was teacher pay. But the big question is, what does that mean to Governor Abbott? Well, what it means to him is likely the Teacher Incentive Allotment Program. Now, basically, that's pay for test performance. That's one of those scams that we've seen in areas like Dallas before, where teachers kind of get their pay based on test performance of kids. But here's the thing: how many teachers are going to want to go teach hard to teach kids, or kids who are struggling, who already have low performance, if this is the way we base everything? And if we think that standardized testing is already overly emphasized right now in classrooms, imagine what it would be like when it's tied to pay. And benchmark testings, exactly, another thing that would be exacerbated when pay is tied to test scores. So that's a big question mark on what that remains, and that remains to be seen. Vouchers, of course, are his priority. We know that and have known that. Something that was a surprise was career and tech education. This is something that's very important, something we know a lot about because of our union brothers and sisters in the building trades, who are participants in very successful apprenticeship programs all over the state that get kids certified in an industry certification, and they're able to make a really great living wage. So we're very excited to see that on the list. But here's the thing. Here's another question that popped up in my mind. I don't think there's any private schools that offer career and tech ed, or at least a career and tech ed that our legislators are envisioning. So this is some important things that we need to remind legislators about. Property tax relief. That sounds like a great deal, but again, if they're going to implement vouchers at the cost of $4 billion a year, then your tax relief is going to be obliterated pretty quickly. Water infrastructure, that was another thing we expected to see. Bail reform, but not the kind of bail reform you're thinking. It's going to be much, much harsher bail system and preventing people from getting out on bail. So lastly, a cyber command center. Again, he wants to compete in the global kind of market space. So he's going to double down and put some state money towards some kind of a cyber command center to ensure that other countries don't steal our intellectual information and whatnot. Now, next week is going to be more eventful. Up to now, the only thing that's basically happened on the House side was the election of the Speaker, and that's Dustin Burrows. But next week, the Speaker is going to release committee assignments, and this is really important. These are the people who are going to be on the committees that are going to hear the bills, the good, bad, and the ugly bills, and these are the folks that we really need to get in touch with and contact over and over to make sure they know that public education is on the line this session. We can't have both. We can't have an underfunded public school system that serves all kids and a voucher system that serves the very wealthy. And if there's, and the only income restrictions, if we can move to the next slide, that I'll mention, the only income restrictions on this voucher bill only kick in once there's 100,000 kids participating. So like I said, Elon Musk could send all 12 of his kids on our dime. But once there's a shortage, the income restriction is 500% of the federal poverty line. That's, as you might imagine, $150,000 or $160,000 rather for a family of four. Not exactly, going to help the downtrodden kids like he says he's going to do. So this is a very nasty bill. And as I mentioned, it's got the ability to destroy the teacher retirement system, which is one of the most robust pension systems in the world. I think the fifth largest in the world. So that would just be devastating. But here's the funny thing that we saw in the Senate yesterday on the floor when this issue of the actuarial risk involved came up. We saw senators tiptoeing and dancing around that and saying, oh, this is not going to happen. It didn't happen in Florida. It's not going to happen here. Well, why did the Legislative Budget Board, which is a very conservative outfit, by the way, why did they bring it up in the first place if it's not a threat? And there's a big difference between Texas and Florida. Texas has 5.5 million students and an untold number of homeschool students because we don't collect that information. It really is the Wild West for homeschool here in Texas. So there's really unknown number of kids that could grab onto this opportunity and take advantage, all on the taxpayer dime, all while our schools continue to be underfunded. So without further ado, I think that we'll get to our special guest tonight. And Marco, you want to introduce our special guest?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Patty. So I'm very honored to introduce Jaime Puente of Every Texan, sorry. Jaime Puente oversees Every Texan's work on education, workforce development, job quality. Before joining Every Texan, he served 3 sessions as a LD or legislative director for 2 members of the State House, Dr. Alma Allen and Ann Johnson, both friends of public education, as he is as well. So go ahead and introduce yourself as well, Jaime.
Hi, Marco and Patty. Thank you for having me. Jaime Puente, the Director of Economic Opportunity for Every Texan. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Jaime. We work very closely with our friends over at Every Texan, which is also a union shop. So we're really glad to work with them whenever we can. Now let's start with the basics, Jaime. Both the Texas House and the Senate have now released their budget proposals. And from your perspective, what are the biggest takeaways from the public education funding in these budgets? Are we seeing any meaningful investment in our schools?
All money is good money, right? Like, so any little bit going to public education is welcome. The problem with the current what we call the base budget, which is the initial recommendations coming from the Senate and the House, what we see is the basic allotment is stagnant. It's still maintained at $6,160 as it was set in 2019. And so, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers know, the basic allotment is the basic building block of how we pay for public education in Texas. And so all the other weights and measures and how we fund schools is built off that $6,160. And that is, it has not been changed since 2019. And, by some of the estimates that we've been looking at, to get us just up to current inflation for the current biennium, we would need to add $1,700 to that. So we would need to be well over $7,500 per student in the basic allotment just to meet inflation. And we do not see that happening in the current budget. And for teachers, my mom was an educator. She worked in HISD schools, and it's one of the reasons why I love public education so much is that that our teachers deserve a pay raise, and they've been working, and just like the schools that they work in have been operating under 2019 dollars in 2025 and 2024 and 2023. It's like the same. Like, imagine going to the store. You don't have to imagine. I bet you go to the store. You went to the store this weekend, and if you could buy a dozen eggs, it probably cost you about $6, right? If not more. And so at the school level, when we're thinking about feeding kids, right, and we're buying hundreds of eggs at 2025 prices with 2019 dollars, you can imagine the cost, right, of the expense, the increased expense. And so until we increase the basic allotment, the $4.8 billion that is in the base budgets for enrollment growth, to meet enrollment growth, to meet, to be the quote unquote historic funding that some are saying it is. That won't get us anywhere near what we need to buy a dozen of eggs for the public school system in Texas.
Great point, and thanks for making it practical. You're absolutely right. None of these things are going to help the practical matters that people are dealing with right now. Now, some lawmakers like to claim that Texas can't afford to make these major investments, and we know this is a base budget, that it's going to change, but how much of these budget constraints are political? How much of them are real? Because we know there's billions in the surplus and in the rainy day fund now. So what's up with that?
I think it's these are choices, right? And at Every Texan, we believe that budgets are moral documents, and when we can put our money where our mouth is. And as educators and people in the public education space, we know that we really have never put our money where our mouth is when it comes to public education. And so when you mention surplus, that kind of grates on our ears over at Every Texan, because we think of a surplus as like paying your bills off and then everything else afterwards, right? Like the stuff you paid all your bills, you're up to date on your mortgage, your car note, your insurance, all that kind of stuff, and then you get a little bit extra to go to the movies later on with, right? Well, that's not what Texas is doing. The reason why we have $22 billion extra of what we call a starting balance this year is that Texas has not paid its bills. Texas has not invested in public education, in teachers, like I said, since 2019. And so imagine, and this is what I like to when people ask about the surplus, it's like, imagine if you did not pay your mortgage or your car note or your insurance for an entire year or 2 years, if you're in the case of Texas. You would have a really big bank account, right? Like that number, that balance sheet on your monthly statement would be really big. You also probably wouldn't have a car or a house, which I think some teachers in Texas are feeling. And so, that's what happens, right? You can have a big bank account if you don't pay your bills. And that's what Texas has been doing. Texas has been balancing its budget on the backs of public educators for far too long.
Thanks, Jaime. And I should note that I think this year the rainy day fund has hit a record level. It's actually overflowing. So it's important to remember that's our money. That's not Greg Abbott's money. That is our money that they're sitting on. So I think when we poll any people in Texas, everyone thinks teachers deserve a raise. But it's, like you said, it's basically a moral document and just these decisions that they're making. Now, as the budget is going through the process, and we know it's a long, complicated process, what are some things that you think we should be on the lookout for and that our members should be on the lookout for during the budget discussions?
I think one of the big things that educators should really be on the lookout for is, like you said, how are we going to, if we are going to invest in public education and educators, how is that the pay raise is going to happen? At Every Texan, we believe, again, like the basic allotment is the rising tide that lifts all boats. If you invest that $4.8 billion, as minuscule of an amount as that is, into the basic allotment, not only does that provide resources to classrooms, that's an increase, a teacher pay increase, right? Like when you raise the basic allotment, there is a portion of that is required to go toward teacher pay raises. And so across the board, without having to jump through any of these hoops, right? Which, we know that there's about 200,000+ teachers in Texas, in Texas public schools, but a small fraction of them are actually served by the current teacher incentive allotment. And so we're not talking about, when we're saying like we're going to invest in teacher pay, we're not talking about across the board pay raises. We're talking about, almost like a lottery type. Like if your school district is privileged enough to have the staff to go and do the work to pull down these teacher incentive allotment dollars so that teachers can get paid, yeah, you're going to do it, right? Like you mentioned Dallas. There's a reason why Dallas was one of the first districts to participate in this. It's because Dallas was already doing this, and the bill was written to mirror what Dallas was already doing. So they were already ready to pull down those dollars. It took almost 2 years for other large school districts to start following suit. Some of the smaller, more rural districts who are going to be extremely hurt after should SB2 actually become law, they're going to still have a hard time pulling down whatever new money for the teacher incentive allotment is given to them, precisely because of the strings that are attached to that money.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, if anything, this just is going to make the scarce dollars that are already scarce for public ed going to be even harder to get a hold of. And I think, we know from experience in other states, the results have been budget meltdowns and reductions in per pupil funding. So SB2 was a really, just could be a really catastrophic bill. But I'm hoping, Jaime, you're an expert on these things. Can you talk a little bit about the racist origins of vouchers? How did this become? Yeah, I'm not very objective on this, but yeah, can you tell us exactly how vouchers became a thing? And
it's a very objective thing to say. It's not untrue that in the way. So in 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional, and we all know the all deliberate speed of that ruling, right? And Texas, along with many other states across the South, people resisted heavily, mightily, forcefully, violently. Mansfield, Texas. If you've never, people like to think about Little Rock and President Eisenhower sending the troops to Little Rock. Well, in Mansfield, Texas, where Representative David Cook is from, he who you might know him from the speaker's race, right? So he represents Mansfield. In I think it was 1957. White residents of Mansfield encircled Mansfield High School with their trucks and weapons and guns, refusing to allow a black family to integrate into that school. Well, there's those ways of resisting desegregation. Well, Texas, at the direction of Governor Allen Shivers at the time, created a subcommittee. They love creating subcommittees. You remember the teacher pay committee, so they love creating these subcommittees to do stuff. Well, one of them was the subcommittee to study the segregation in public schools, and one of the recommendations from that report came was an ESA. Basically, it was like if if a district decides that they are going to follow the law of the land through Brown and desegregate their schools, well, white parents could then refuse to enroll their kids in those schools and be entitled to basically a voucher if they were to say that they were not going to allow or that school was not going to be a desegregated school. So as long as those schools were segregated, they could use that voucher for that education. And so that's the kind of origins, at least in Texas. And Senator West last night, he mentioned some other longer more distant history of vouchers in Texas, but really in the modern era, that's when it started. And it really started as an idea by this guy named Milton Friedman, from he's a Chicago economist, and members in the legislature love to quote Milton Friedman. We won't get into the problematics of him, but he really championed this idea of, okay, well, if you don't agree with what the government's doing in your school, then you should pull them out and you should pull that money out. You should privatize it. And so since the 50s, there's been an effort to privatize public education in direct response to each new effort to make them more equal.
Well, yeah, and this is one of multiple attempts. In fact, I think this is maybe the fourth or fifth time the Texas Senate has passed vouchers between this session and the last session. So So it's something that's very, very at the top of the mind of the governor and of those in leadership. Hyman, last question. Many educators, as I'm sure you can imagine, feel frustrated, like their voices aren't being heard at the Capitol. What can teachers and school staff and community members do right now to make sure their concerns are heard about the budget and about vouchers, and to make sure they're taken seriously?
You know, I like um, what's the old Ben Franklin phrase that people like to use: a democracy as long as you can keep it, right? So as long as we are still governed by the Texas Constitution and the U.S. Constitution, I wholeheartedly endorse members and their families to reach out to their state representative, to reach out to their state senator, to call the governor's office, to call the speaker's office. And they might not always be as responsive to our calls as Elon Musk or that guy from Pennsylvania, but we have the right to call and ask for redress from our government. As long as we are Texans and Americans, that's our duty. And so there's going to be opportunities. If you are privileged enough, like myself, to be within driving distance of the Texas Capitol, there's going to be a bunch of opportunities to participate. And go and testify and make your voice heard at the Capitol. But otherwise, like, make phone calls, like engage your neighbors, remind them, that, hey, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. Like, I dedicated my life to making our state better by educating the future. And just tell that story, because I think there's too many people who are demonizing educators and demonizing our public schools right now. And if we remind folks that, hey, I'm a teacher, I love it. It's hard. It's not the easiest job. Sometimes I got to pay for my kids to eat or pay for them to have some shoes. But you know what? I do that because I love it, and I love them, and I love my state. And I think, like, the more we can tell those stories, the stronger our fight is.
That's a great message. Thanks so much, Jaime, and thanks so much for spending time with us this evening and for being in the fight with us. We really appreciate your solidarity.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Like I said, I come from a long line of public educators, and I'm happy to be there with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jaime.
Yeah, thank you, Jaime. Republic, if you can keep it. What an important sentiment for the times that we're in. As we get to wrap up, I do want to ask you a question, Patty, from one of our inquisitive commenters, on all, between all our social media feeds. This is from Maria, and I'll quote her directly. Where can I get more info about the effect of SB2 on TRS? I read a screenshot of the actuarial report that makes the claim, but I am unclear about how exactly money for TRS will go to vouchers.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, and I could have been more clear on that. But yeah, it's not so much that the money is diverted from TRS, which it is actually. I'll get to that in a moment. But it's the fact that payroll growth, because every active teacher pays into TRS, and that supports the pension fund for retired teachers, but it also supports the pension fund for when they retire. So it's not just a teacher payment, but it's also the state pays into this too, a contribution for every single active teacher. So if these teachers were to be laid off, or if people were to have to expand class sizes because they can't afford to keep teachers hired, that's when the payroll growth will decline. And so this is all actuarial science. And so they project this 30 years out. And so what they project is that within 12 years, there will be such a dip in the payroll growth that the system would become actuarially unsound. Now, again, that would be catastrophic, because that means no increases in annuities. It could mean a decrease in your benefits, and even increases in active teachers having to pay more of their salary into the pension system. So I think we have a link that we posted in there of the actuarial statement. But that was a really good question, because no, the money doesn't directly go to vouchers that would otherwise go to TRS, but it does, and here's how. What Creighton is saying when he filed SB2 is, he said, "Oh, this is coming out of the general revenue fund. This is not coming out of the foundation school program. It's not going to affect public schools." But guess where the foundation school program funding comes from? General revenue. But here's the thing, general revenue also shores up the teacher retirement system. So the less money there is, the less money there is in the general revenue fund, because it's diverted to a $4 billion a year brand new entitlement, then that ultimately affects every other program. In fact, the way I explain it is, our budget is as simple as a family budget, the state budget is. And if we're starting to invite new people to the table, people who've never been at the table before, then everyone else is going to eat less. It's not like this money is falling out of the sky, y'all. So someone's going to have to pay for it, and it's going to be all of the taxpayers of Texas.
Thank you, Patty. What a great metaphor. It was going to pay for all this. It was going to pay for all these new people at the table. That's great. So thanks again, Patty, and thanks to Jaime for his time. As we wrap up, we do have a little bit of homework for y'all. Some of you listening give out homework, and we're going to do the same. So first thing, super important, sign on to that Educators Bill of Rights. You've heard it 100 times. You've probably seen a few news articles about it. If you haven't done it yet, there's no excuses left. Get it done. It's right there, bit.ly/Ed Bill of Rights. It's super easy. It takes less than a minute to look over the priorities, see that everything that we're fighting for will do material good for all public school employees and students of the state of Texas. So get on down there, get her done. Second thing, after you do that, figure out who represents you. As Jaime mentioned earlier, our democracy is only as strong as the informed voting public that communicates with their legislators. So find out who represents you. It's super easy to do. It's no big secret. It's not rocket science. They're not hiding yet. And email, call, request that meeting with staff. Oftentimes you can just give them a call. You can write a script. You can wing it. I prefer to wing it, honestly. Speak from the heart, or from your head or from your heart, and tell them that it's really important that they pass key tenets of the Educators Bill of Rights. The next thing you can do after that is talk to your colleagues about the Educators Bill of Rights. Organizing around this issue will be extremely important for passing our priorities and defeating privatization. So if you want to know how to do that, you can join us on February 20th for our next Organizing Texas session. There should be a link popping up for that as well. And last thing, save the date. If you'd like more updates like this, if you want to hear more from me and from Patty and from our the great people that we work with to fight for public education, you can hear again from us this next coming March 6th, Thursday. And there will be a mobilized link for that as well. So you have a month, to get ready for that. But in the meantime, go ahead and take action around the Educators Bill of Rights. It's really, really important. And with that, I think we can close out. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope you have a wonderful evening and a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Without the union, I'm pretty sure we would be in turmoil.
I have been employed by the district for more than 23 years, and I am currently homeless. I take care of Texas kids every day, and I make $23,000 a year. I don't want to walk away from my kids, but I have to take care of myself.
Freedom doesn't come like a bird on the wing, and it doesn't fall down like a pouring rain. Freedom is a hard-won thing, and every generation has to win it again. It's your generation that now has to go out and fight.